Rain battered the colony with a relentless rhythm, hammering steel walkways until every corridor of Aurelis Prime seemed to echo with the storm's fury. Curfew sirens pulsed from the towers, their shrill notes cutting through the night, a warning for anyone still exposed. Doors had already sealed with hydraulic finality, one by one entire blocks vanishing behind airtight locks. The air smelled of disinfectant and rust, sharp enough to sting the lungs. Inside his fourth-floor unit, Ronald Vale stood at the window with his arms folded tight across his chest. He wasn't supposed to be awake, but sleep rarely came. He had made anonymity his survival. In the years since the border conflicts, he had traded rank for quiet, duty for paperwork. As a registry archivist, he processed the colony's files with precision and no opinion, so long as he kept his head down. No one looked at him twice. But the way his shoulders squared, the way his eyes tracked the shadows between towers, betrayed him. Soldiers never truly unlearned vigilance. He told himself he was just watching the storm. That was safer than admitting he still scanned for threats in every movement. Movement did catch his eye then, something out of rhythm with the downpour. A figure staggered along the rain-slicked wall below. Ronald leaned closer, frowning. The intersection cameras swept across the street with their mechanical patience, and in the few seconds of their blind spot, the figure was exposed under the floodlights. She was tall, emerald skin gleaming wet, her long red hair plastered to her shoulders. She braced herself against the wall, then slid down to the pavement, her body racked by tremors. Even from this distance, he could see her lips pale with cold. His gut clenched when he saw the faint square burned into her wrist. The heritage mark. Widow, outcast. The registry stripped women like her of rations, shelter, protection. They were erased from the system, left outside the sealed doors when storms hit. Efficient, the bureaucrats said, legal, but Ronald knew what it really was. Slow execution by neglect. He should have looked away. Most did. Looking meant risk investigation, demotion, worse. His jaw tightened as the cameras swept back, and for a moment he told himself it wasn't his problem. Then she collapsed forward into the puddles, her body jerking with violent shivers, too weak to rise. The decision hit him like a switch. There were no excuses left. He grabbed the magnet plate from the frame by the door, a relic trick from his service days, and moved fast down the stairwell. His boots struck hard against the metal steps, steady and controlled, even as the storm roared outside. At the entrance, he slid the plate into place over the lock sensor, fooling the system into believing the door was sealed. With a heavy pull, he forced it open against the push of wind and rain. The cold slapped him, soaking through his shirt instantly. The woman jerked at the light spilling from inside, her thin shawl clinging to her ribs, silk torn and useless against the storm. Her legs buckled again. He caught her under the arms before she fell, shocked at how light she felt, how icy her skin was against his. Her amber eyes flicked up at him, sharp even in exhaustion, suspicion cutting through the weakness. "Inside?" Ronald said, his voice firm but low. He wasn't asking. She hesitated, gaze darting past him toward the heater's glow, and then to the cameras sweeping behind his shoulder. Pride or fear held her still. Her hands trembled over the fabric clutched at her chest. "I won't force you." He spread his hands open, showing them empty. "It's your choice. But you won't. Last out here." Her eyes dropped the ID, clipped to his breast pocket. Vale, registry archivist. She clenched her jaw, a bitter recognition. But when her knees gave again, he didn't wait. He lifted her with practiced efficiency, her weight cradled against him, and carried her across the threshold. The door sealed with a click behind them, shutting out the roar of the storm. Heat washed over them from the vents, sudden and overwhelming after the cold. Ronald lowered her onto the entry bench, his movements quick but careful. He pulled the blanket from the hook and wrapped it around her shoulders, tucking it close across her waist and thighs. She flinched, then sagged into it, the trembling in her limbs only half contained. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "No bravado, only certainty." Her lips parted, voice breaking as she whispered, "They locked me out. Heritage strike." She raised her wrist, the square mark ugly and raw. Ronald looked at it, then at her face. His chest ached with the anger he had long kept buried beneath discipline. He didn't speak. Instead, he poured hot water into a steel mug and pressed it into her shaking hands. She hesitated, then wrapped her fingers around it, holding on as though it were the only solid thing left as steam rose between them. Ronald Vale knew one thing. He had broken his rule of staying invisible, and nothing about his life would remain. The same steam still clung to the air from the mug between her hands, fogging faintly in the dim light of Ronald's apartment. The woman's eyes flicked from the door to the heater, then back to him, as if calculating angles, weighing exits. Even half frozen, she carried herself like someone who refused to beg. Pride, even under the mark. Ronald recognized it. Pride was often the last thing people clung to when the world stripped them of everything else. "You can't stay cold," he said, crouching in front of her. His tone was matter of fact, not gentle, not harsh. "The shower's hot. Clothes in the cabinet. If you try to sleep like this, your body will give out." Her jaw tightened, lips pale and trembling, but her eyes stayed sharp. Suspicion first, gratitude second, that much was clear. A slow movement broke the standoff. Her hand slipped beneath the wet shawl. A blade, no longer than his palm, glinted faintly in the heater's glow. She didn't brandish it, didn't threaten. She simply let him see it. "I keep this," she rasped, voice raw. Ronald didn't flinch. He let his gaze travel from the blade back to her face, steady as stone. "Good," he said quietly. "If I'm not who I say I am, use it." For a moment, the storm outside seemed quieter than the silence between them. Her breath shuddered. She searched his expression for mockery, deceit, anything. She found nothing. Finally, her shoulders sagged a fraction. She tucked the blade back into the folds of her clothing. He rose, retrieving a towel and a folded shirt from the cabinet. He set them on the bathroom counter, then stood aside. "Door stays cracked," he said. "If you slip, I'll hear. I don't cross the threshold unless you call." She stared at him as if waiting for the trick, the catch, the moment he would reveal himself as no different from the men who had left her to die outside. He held her stare with nothing but quiet certainty. At last, she pulled the blanket tighter, rose shakily, and stepped toward the bathroom. Her bare feet left wet prints across the floor. Ronald leaned against the wall just outside as the pipes groaned and water began to flow. Within seconds, steam drifted out, carrying with it the faint smell of soap and iron from the pipes. He crossed his arms, eyes fixed on the corridor, listening. It wasn't just her safety he guarded, though. That was reason enough. It was also the knowledge that he had just put himself in the registry's crosshairs. If word spread that he had sheltered a branded widow, the consequences would come fast. Neighbors whispered. Inspectors knocked. The system punished deviation without hesitation. But leaving her outside hadn't been an option. He'd watched too many die by the rules of men who never dirtied their boots in storms. Not again. The water stopped after a long stretch, replaced by the faint scrape of the curtain rod, the soft shuffle of feet. When she emerged, her damp red hair clung to her cheeks, her skin flushed from heat. She wore his shirt, the hem brushing her thighs, sleeves rolled awkwardly up her arms. In one hand, she still carried the knife, not raised, just present, Her amber eyes met his, searching again. He noted the faint glow along her collarbone, brighter now that her blood had warmed, a pulse of bioluminescence catching in the heater light. Her grip on the blade loosened slightly, though she didn't put it away. Ronald nodded toward the kitchen. Food. A single word, plain as a command, but not unkind. She hesitated in the doorway, clutching the edge of the blanket around her shoulders. Her gaze drifted around his apartment, the bare shelves, the stacked files, the coats lined with military precision. No decorations, no softness. Just the order of a man who lived alone too long. "You live like an officer," she said, her voice rough but steady. He didn't deny it. Old habit. He pulled a chair out at the table. "Sit before the broth. Goes cold." She crossed the room with slow, deliberate steps, the knife still in her palm, the blanket draped like armor. She sat, eyes fixed on him as though every movement might reveal who he really was. Ronald set a bowl before her, slid a piece of bread across the table, then sat opposite. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the storm easing against the shutters, and the faint clink of a spoon as she lifted it. Her lips parted around. The first taste. Suspicion didn't vanish, but hunger won. She ate small, careful bites at first, then faster. Ronald didn't rush her. He watched, calm, the discipline of a man who had learned patience the hard way. She ate as though waiting for him to demand something in return. When he didn't, her shoulders lowered, barely perceptible, but real. Finally, she spoke, voice quiet. "Why risk it?" His eyes met hers without flinching. "Because I didn't want to watch you die outside my window." Her spoon froze midway. The storm might have been silent for the weight in the room then. Pride flickered in her gaze, but so did something else, something more fragile. She swallowed hard, then lowered the spoon. For the first time, she let the knife rest flat on the table. Not surrendered. But no longer in her fist. Ronald Vale leaned back, arms crossed, steady as ever. He had crossed the line the moment he opened the door, and there was no turning back. The storm outside had thinned to a drizzle by the time the last drops slid down. The window pane. Inside, warmth had settled into the apartment, though it had not yet softened the air between them. Lion sat curled in the chair, Ronald's shirt loose around her shoulders, the blanket still clutched tight. The knife rested flat on the table, untouched but never out of reach. Ronald moved with the same quiet precision as always, stacking. Bowls, wiping the table, every gesture deliberate and economical. He gave her silence, because pressing would only harden her guard. When he returned to sit across from her, the weight of her stare pressed against him. "You knew the blind spots," she said at last. Her voice was hoarse, but there was steel under it. The cameras, the timing. Most men wouldn't risk it. Ronald leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. Most men didn't see what? "I saw." Her amber eyes narrowed, testing. "And if the registry comes tomorrow? If they knock on this door and ask why you harbored me?" "They won't," he said with certainty. "Not without a reward on my head, and no one here risks that without cause. The neighbors keep their silence to survive, same as I do." She studied him for a long moment, then exhaled through her. "Nose. Safe for now," she murmured, as if tasting the words. He nodded once, for now. The silence that followed was heavier than before, but not hostile. It carried questions neither had asked yet. Finally, she set the spoon down and leaned back, her wrist sliding free of the blanket. The brand was clear in the heater light. A raw, ugly square burned into her skin. She lifted it slightly, her jaw tight. "This mark means I am not a person anymore. You file those papers, archivist. You know what it means." "I file them," Ronald admitted, eyes fixed on hers. "Doesn't mean I agree. Her laugh was bitter, sharp. Then why stay in that job? Why hide behind stacks of files, while women like me are left in the street? His jaw clenched, but his voice stayed even. Because invisibility keeps me alive. Because when the system looks past you, you get to keep breathing. I learned a long time ago that survival isn't noble, it's disciplined. For a long time she said nothing, her gaze darting over his face as though weighing if that was cowardice or strength. Finally, her lips parted. "You served," she said. "Not a question in observation. It's in the way you walk, the way you stand. You've carried men before." Ronald's sleeve had slid up as he leaned forward, revealing the scar running across his forearm. He didn't hide it. Reconnaissance. Border conflicts. A long time ago. Her eyes softened for the first time since stepping into his home, but only slightly. "And now you carry me." Her tone wasn't gratitude. It was a test. He held her gaze, steady. "You carried yourself this far. I just opened a door." The words landed harder than he intended. She dropped her eyes to the table, her fingers brushing the brand again, tracing the square as if she could rub it away. Her jaw trembled not from cold this time, but from the memory of being reduced to that single mark. She covered it quickly, tugging the blanket higher. Ronald leaned forward, breaking the pause. "The registry will come eventually. And when they do, the only shield strong enough is a clause they can't ignore." Her head lifted, eyes narrowing. "The marriage clause." He didn't look away. "Yes." Her lips pressed together, the air between them taut. "That makes me your dependent." "No," he said firmly. "It makes you my partner. On record, they won't touch you. Off record, what it becomes is yours to decide. I won't file dependence. I file protection." Amber eyes burned into his, searching for a trap. All she found was certainty. Her throat worked as she swallowed. Then she leaned back, voice dropping low. "You wrote it. Case 77 to 64. The descent." Ronald froze. For a moment, the storm outside was silent compared to the pulse in his ears. "You read that?" Her hand went to the shawl folded on the chair, fingers brushing the fabric. "I carried it. Folded in my pocket for months. Proof that one human at least knew it was wrong." Ronald exhaled slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. He had written that descent thinking no one would see, no one would care. Now the proof of its impact sat across from him, damp hair clinging to her shoulders, knife on the table, eyes still sharp despite exhaustion. She leaned forward slightly, voice steady. "So tell me, Ronald Vale, if you knew enough to write it, if you knew enough to risk opening your door, why me?" He met her gaze without flinching. "Because last night I watched you collapse outside. My window. Because I know what happens if I close it and let you die. And because I won't be that man." Her lips parted, caught off guard. For the first time, suspicion faltered. She looked down at her wrist, the ugly square brand, and then back at him. The silence stretched, not empty, but heavy with the weight of choices neither could take back. For both of them, survival had just shifted into something far more dangerous. Corridors of Aurella's prime smelled of rust and damp stone the morning they left Ronald's unit together. The storm had drained into the gutter shafts, leaving the walkways slick, their steel rails glistening under pale light. Lion walked at his side, the black thermal shirt he had given her tucked tight against her frame, a borrowed jacket hiding the faint glow at her collarbone. Her stride was steady, chin high, but every passing glance was a blade. Neighbors didn't speak openly. They didn't have to. Doors cracked, eyes lingered, whispers followed in the spaces between footsteps. Ronald ignored them, as he always did. His posture was military straight, his stride controlled. If the colony wanted to watch, let them. He wasn't here for their approval. Lion felt the judgment on her skin, like another brand. A man in a gray jacket muttered something under his breath as they passed. A woman clutching water credits pulled her child closer, eyes darting away. Lion's amber gaze burned hot, but she kept her silence, drawing strength from the way Ronald didn't waver. The registry office sat like a stone in the colony's chest. High walls, sterilized steel, the air thick with the chemical sting of ink and antiseptic. The interior buzzed faintly with terminals, screens displaying the endless flow of bureaucratic data. Behind the counter sat a board clerk, his shoulders slouched, a synth mint strip tucked in his cheek. His eyes barely lifted from his pad when Ronald approached. "Business?" The clerk muttered, his tone flat. "Marriage filing." "Immediate," Ronald said. His voice was crisp, authoritative, no space for debate. The clerk's gaze sharpened when it landed on Lion. His eyes drifted down her legs, paused on her wrist, then lifted to her collarbone, where the faint glow shimmered despite her jacket. His smirk spread, small but cutting. "You know what she is," the clerk said, voice thick with mockery. "I know exactly what she is," Ronald replied evenly. "File it," the smirk lingered. "Your records are clean, Vale. You sure you want to tag yourself with a widow? With this one?" He gestured lazily toward Lion, as though she were an item on a discard shelf. Ronald leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the counter. The movement was subtle, but it carried weight. His shoulders squared, his voice dropped to steel. "File it," the clerk's smirk faltered. For a moment he seemed to measure whether the mockery was worth pushing further. Then, with a sharp exhale, he pulled the forms onto the desk. His stamp thudded down on the paper, harder than necessary, ink bleeding into the seal. The sound echoed in the quiet room. "Done," the clerk muttered. "Congratulations." The mockery lingered, but his eyes no longer dared meet Ronald's. He slid the stamped papers across the counter. Ronald collected them with a calm hand, slid them into his folder, and turned without another word. Lion followed him out, her steps sharp against the steel floor. Outside, the air felt heavier. She exhaled, a sound caught between relief and disbelief. "That's it?" she asked. "Just a stamp, and suddenly I'm not trash anymore?" "That's it," Ronald said, though his jaw was tight. "The system doesn't care about fairness, only forms and signatures." They walked back through the corridors, every step echoing louder in the silence of onlookers. The whispers had changed. No longer about a widow marked for death, but about the archivist who had claimed her. Curiosity, suspicion, resentment, it all followed like shadows. Back inside his apartment, the door sealed with a hiss. Lane leaned against it, her palm pressed to the cold metal. Her breathing was unsteady, her chest rising and falling under the borrowed shirt. When she turned, her amber eyes locked on him. "You didn't hesitate," she said, her voice raw. "Not once." Ronald set the folder on the table. His expression was unreadable. "Hesitation gets people killed. I've seen enough of that." She stepped forward slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "And what does it mean to you now, having me under your name?" His answer came without pause. "It means responsibility. It means you're not alone anymore. What else it becomes, we'll decide together." Her throat worked as she swallowed. She looked down at the stamped paper, then at her wrist. Her fingers brushed the raw edges of the square brand. Her voice was quieter now, almost fragile. "On the record, I'm your wife." Ronald's gaze didn't waver. "On the record, yes. Off the record, that depends on trust." For the first time since she had stepped into his apartment, her amber eyes softened. The suspicion hadn't vanished, but beneath it something else flickered. Relief, possibility, choice. The storm outside had passed, but inside, the air carried the weight of something far stronger. Two lives bound together, not by law alone, but by a decision neither could take back. The notice came at dawn. Slid under the door with a metallic scrape. Ronald spotted it first, crouching to pick it up. His eyes scanned the stamped letters: occupancy audit, randomized inspection, midday. He didn't believe in random. Nothing in Aurella's prime was random. Someone had whispered about yesterday's filing, and the system was already probing for weakness. He set the paper on the table without a flicker of concern. Lion sat on the edge of the bed, knees drawn up, her hair braided loosely over one shoulder. She had slept in the black tank, and leggings he had given her, the brand on her wrist visible now in the pale light filtering through the shutters. Her gaze tracked the paper like it was another execution order. "They'll come by cycle noon," Ronald said evenly. "We'll be ready." Her eyes narrowed, suspicious. "Ready how?" "They'll question me. They'll see what I am. They'll test me," he corrected. "Not you. The stamp overrides everything else. You're Veil now. That's the law. And if they try to strip it," his jaw tightened, his voice sharpening, "they'll have to get through me." The certainty unsettled her. And yet, beneath the unease, she felt a sliver of comfort in his words. Her amber gaze lingered on him, trying to decide if his defiance was bravery or recklessness. She found no hesitation in his face, only the same calm, soldier's discipline she'd seen since the night he carried her across the threshold dot. By midday, the apartment was pristine. Papers filed and stacked neatly. Dishes washed and put away. Ronald had scrubbed the place of any sign that life had changed overnight, yet arranged it carefully enough to suggest it always had been this way. 2 cups on the rack, 2 chairs. Sat at the table, her shawl folded and tucked out of sight. Even the bed looked lived in, not staged. Discipline turned into theater, one that could mean the difference between freedom and exposure. When the chime came at the door, Ronald's posture straightened. He opened it to reveal a thin man in a slate-colored inspection uniform. The inspector's jaw worked a synth-mint strip, filling the air with a sharp chemical tang. His eyes skimmed the room with bureaucratic boredom until they landed on Lion. His gaze lingered too long. "Routine occupancy check," the inspector said flatly, stepping inside without invitation. Ronald held out the stamped papers immediately. "Filed yesterday. Certified." The inspector arched a brow, smirk tugging at his lips. That was fast. "I don't stall," Ronald replied. Voice even. The man flipped through the pages lazily, then looked back at Lion. His smirk sharpened. "You speak well, for someone marked. Most keep quiet." Lion's jaw clenched, but she forced her voice to stay steady. "I've had enough silence forced on me." The inspector studied her for a moment longer, perhaps waiting for her to falter. Ronald's stance shifted subtly, shoulders squared, hands loose at his sides, calm but ready. The soldier beneath the archivist stood visible in the steel of his eyes. Finally, the inspector shrugged. "Everything in order." He scrawled a digital signature across his pad, then handed the papers back. At the door, he paused. His eyes flicked once more to Lion's faint glow at her collarbone, then to Ronald's unblinking stare. "Strange choice," he muttered, almost to himself. "Plenty of easier options out there." Ronald didn't move, didn't blink. His reply was flat as iron. "I don't choose easy." The inspector's smirk faltered. He tapped the panel and left, the door sealing behind him with a hiss. Silence filled the apartment again. Lion exhaled slowly, shoulders sagging. She turned toward Ronald. "You didn't even blink," she whispered. "Blinking gives him ground," he said simply, sliding the papers back into his folder. "We gave him nothing." Her amber eyes softened, a hint of something she had tried to bury surfacing. She stepped closer, her hand rising before she could stop it. Her fingers brushed the gray at his temple, lingering there. "You act like You've done this 100 times. I've stood inspections in worse places, he admitted. The trick is to make them believe they've already won, so they stop pressing. Her hand lingered, her breath catching. For a moment, she seemed almost startled by her own gesture. Then she pulled back quickly, flustered, but the warmth stayed in her gaze. That night, they ate in quiet at the small table, knees brushing beneath the wood. Neither spoke of it. Neither needed to. The touch remained between them, a silent acknowledgement that something had shifted again. Outside, the colony continued its indifferent rhythm. But inside Ronald's apartment, the storm had changed shape. No longer rain against the glass, but whispers at the door, inspectors with sharp eyes, and a bond growing stronger under the weight of scrutiny. The night cycle draped Aurelas. Prime in dim red light, the colony's corridors humming as shutters locked into place. Inside Ronald's apartment, the heater hummed steady, filling the silence with warmth. Lion sat on the bed, legs drawn beneath her, brushing out her damp red hair with slow, careful strokes. She wore the plain black tank and leggings he had given her, the fabric clinging close to her frame, her amber eyes catching the low light like embers. Ronald sat at the table, polishing his boots out of old habit, every movement deliberate. Yet his eyes lifted more often than they should have, drawn to her without disguise. She noticed. Her hand stilled, brush resting in her lap, and her gaze caught his. For a long beat neither looked away. "You don't hide it," she said finally, setting the brush aside. Her voice was quiet but steady. Ronald tilted his head slightly. "Hide what?" "When you look at me." Her lips curved faintly, not quite a smile. Most men stare without shame. Others pretend not to at all. You don't do either. He set the boot down and leaned forward, forearms resting on his knees. His voice was low, measured. "I don't waste energy on pretending." Her breath caught, the faintest tremor crossing her shoulders. "And what do you want when you look?" Silence stretched, thick with unspoken weight. Ronald let it breathe before answering. "I want what's in front of me, but only if you want it too." The words disarmed her. She had braced for entitlement, for demand disguised as kindness. Instead, she found choice laid bare. Her hand lifted, brushing a strand of hair back behind her ear. "And if I said no?" "Then I'd take the chair," he said simply, "like last night. No questions." Her amber eyes searched his face for cracks, hesitation, performance, manipulation. She found none. His stillness was not indifference. It was discipline. Choice truly sat with her. Slowly, deliberately, her hand reached out, brushing his wrist. The touch was light but deliberate, a test. When he didn't pull away, her fingers slid higher along his forearm. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Then, stay here." Ronald rose without haste, his movements precise but steady. He crossed the room in 2 steps, standing a pace from her. Her chest rose and fell faster, but her gaze never wavered. When she tilted her chin up, he leaned down and pressed his mouth to hers. The kiss was not rushed. It was anchored, certain, each second deepening until her fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer. The bed creaked as she leaned back, her body warm beneath his weight. Their breaths grew uneven, the sound filling the small apartment. His hand traced her side, sliding beneath the hem of the tank, firm but never rough. She arched into his touch, meeting his pace, refusing to be passive. Her legs wrapped around his waist, holding him close, her voice catching in his mouth when he kissed her deeper. "You don't have to be careful," she whispered against his skin, her breath hot at his ear. "I want to be," he murmured back, voice steady even as his pulse thundered. She exhaled sharply, then pulled him down with a sudden urgency. The rhythm between them shifted, less tentative now, more certain. Heat built fast, their bodies moving together with a rough kind of grace, firm but not desperate. He gave as much as he took, and she returned it, her strength re-emerging in every press, every breath. Time blurred in the hum of the heater, the rustle of fabric, the low groan of the mattress. No colony laws, no marks, no files existed in that moment. Only the choice they both had made. When it ended, they lay tangled in the sheets, sweat cooling against the recycled air. Lion rested her head on his chest, her hair spilling across his skin. Her fingers traced the scar along his forearm, lingering there. "You said you wouldn't waste energy on pretending," she murmured, her voice softened by exhaustion. "Don't start now." "I won't," Ronald said, his hand sliding into her hair, holding her close. His voice was steady, even as weariness dragged at him. Her body loosened, breath evening, trust inching in where suspicion had lived. For the first time in years, she didn't need to sleep with one hand on a weapon. Ronald, staring at the faint red glow through the blinds, knew the cost of what they had crossed into. His anonymity was gone. He no longer lived invisible. Yet, as Lion's weight pressed against him, he realized he no longer wanted to. Morning broke quiet and pale, the kind of rare calm Aurelis Prime seldom allowed. The shutters rolled back with their usual hiss, letting thin gold light spill into Ronald's apartment. He stirred first, his soldier's instincts waking him long before alarms. But when he tried to shift, there was weight against him. Lion lay across his chest, her red hair a damp tangle over his skin, her breath slow, steady. For a moment, Ronald allowed himself stillness. The faint bioluminescent glow at her collarbone pulsed in rhythm with her breathing, brightening when she exhaled, dimming as she drew air in again. He had seen battlefields illuminated by fire and tracer rounds. This light felt more dangerous, because it meant something worth losing. Lion stirred, lifting her head slowly. Her amber eyes blinked open, hazy with sleep, then sharpened when she remembered where she was. She looked at him, not with fear this time, but with quiet recognition. "You're awake already," she murmured, voice husky. "Old habits," Ronald replied. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch steady. Her eyes searched him, cautious but no longer guarded. "And do old habits tell you this was a mistake?" His answer was firm, immediate. "No." Something shifted in her expression, like a taut cord easing. She sat up, drawing the sheet across her shoulders, her gaze drifting to the stamped papers still resting on the table. The ink seal caught the morning light. She looked down at her wrist, tracing the ugly square of her heritage mark with her fingers. "On paper, I'm your wife," she said quietly. "On paper," Ronald confirmed, sitting up beside her. His voice was calm, but there was weight in it. "Off paper, it depends on trust and choice." She turned her face to him, her eyes sharp. "Again, then hear mine. I didn't survive this long to live as someone's dependent. If I stay, it's because I choose, not because I owe." He met her gaze without hesitation. "Then choose." Silence stretched between them, not hostile, but heavy. She swallowed, her jaw tight. Finally she leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. Her whisper came like an anchor. "Then I'll choose you back." The words settled between them. Fragile but undeniable, Dot. Later that day, they stepped into the corridors together. Neighbors paused their conversations. Water credits exchanged with slowed hands, eyes flicking to the pair, walking side by side. Whispered judgments swirled, some mocking, some resentful, some curious. Ronald walked as he always did, shoulders square, gaze forward, unshaken by scrutiny. Lion's stride matched his, chin high, her amber eyes daring anyone to meet them. No one blocked their path. No one dared, but the colony's silence was never safety. By evening, a knock came, not the timid scrape of a neighbor, but the heavy rap of authority. Ronald opened the door to find 2 registry enforcers, armored uniforms gleaming under corridor lights. Their leader held up a pad. "Ronald Vale, you're summoned." Lion stiffened at his side, her hand instinctively brushing the mark on her wrist. The enforcer's gaze caught the gesture, and his mouth curved in faint disdain. "We've had reports. Questions about the legitimacy of your filing. It seems your record isn't as spotless as you'd like us to believe." He turned the pad so Ronald could see. On the screen was a copy of Dissent, case 77 to 64. Ronald's words, written years ago against the widow mark policy, glowing on record. Lion's breath caught. She looked from the pad to Ronald, realization striking sharp. "It was you," she whispered. The enforcer's smirk widened. "A traitor to the registry, hiding behind a sham union. You'll answer for this." Ronald's body stilled, the soldier surfacing in the way his stance shifted, controlled and ready. But before he could speak, Lion stepped forward. Her voice cut the corridor silence. Not sham, not pity, choice. She held her wrist high, the brand clear under the corridor lights. And as she spoke, the faint glow at her collarbone flared brighter, pulsing down her skin. Gasps rippled from the neighbors who had gathered to watch. Her bioluminescence had never shone so vividly. To her people, it was a signal of truth, of bond, of undeniable will. The enforcer faltered, momentarily unsettled by the display. Voice carried through the hush. "You branded me as less than human. You left me to die in the street. But this man opened his door, not to save me, not to own me, because I chose him. And now I choose him again." The glow spread across her, shoulders luminous, impossible to deny. The neighbors whispered, louder now, the story already rewriting itself in their eyes. Ronald's hand closed over hers, steady and grounding. His voice was iron. "We're done here." The enforcer's smirk was gone. He tapped the pad, muttering something about escalation, but when he left, his stride was less certain than when he arrived. The corridor buzzed with whispers, no longer just judgment, but awe. Back inside, the door sealed shut. Ronald turned to Lion. Her chest rose and fell with the weight of what she had just done. He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers. "You just put a target on yourself." Her amber eyes lifted to his, fierce and unshaken. "So did you the moment you opened your door. If I burn, I'll burn beside you." The words hit harder than any vow the registry could stamp. For the first time since Aurella's prime had marked her, Lion wasn't just surviving. She was living, and she was doing it by choice. And Ronald Vale, once invisible, no longer wanted to disappear. Together, they had just made themselves impossible to ignore.